Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Principles for Ethical Online Funding Platforms, hosted by the National Council of Nonprofits. My name is Kara Young Ponder, and I am the Vice President of Knowledge, Impact, and Strategy here at NCN. I will serve as moderator during our webinar today. Before we get started, we have a couple of housekeeping matters to share with you. All lines are in listen-only mode. Live captioning and ASL interpretation are available and can be accessed using the buttons at the bottom of your screen. If you have questions during the webinar, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we will answer them as time allows. Lastly, this webinar is being recorded. I am joined today by Sarah Sadian, Senior Vice President of Public Policy and Campaigns at NCN, Jill Bennett, Chief Executive Officer at the Utah Nonprofits Association, Kevin Dean, President and CEO of Tennessee Nonprofit Network, Allison Fine, the President of Every.org, Jeff Green, the Chief Executive Officer at Cal Nonprofits, and Lori Wolf, the President and CEO of the Foraker Group. During today's webinar, we will hear from Sarah, who will talk to us about a new set of policies and principles on ethical practices for online fundraising platforms and why they're important. We will then have a moderated panel conversation featuring Jill, Kevin, Allison, Jeff, and Lori, and then Allison will give a brief set of remarks. Before I turn the floor over to Sarah Sadian, I want to share a brief word about the work we're doing at the National Council of Nonprofits. Our vision at NCN is a connected and powerful nonprofit community that is championing the public good. We champion, inform, and connect organizations across the country to protect and advance the sector, to support nonprofit organizations in maintaining and expanding the essential work you all do every day in all of our communities. We're proud to be the largest network of nonprofit organizations in North America. And our closest, most essential partners in this work is our network of state associations of nonprofit organizations. If you're not familiar with one of your or a member of your state association of nonprofits, please join them now. You can find a list of them on our website, or you can reach out to us to get connected. Through joining your state association of nonprofits, you also become a member of the National Council of Nonprofits. And together, this is how you can receive the most up-to-date information on what's happening in DC, how that impacts what's happening in your state, and how you can prepare and get involved in the work to protect and advance the sector. You can learn more and sign up for our newsletters at councilofnonprofits.org, and you can follow us on social at National Council Nonprofits. And now I am pleased to turn the floor over to Sarah Sadian, the SVP of Public Policy and Campaigns for NCN.
Thanks, Kara. I appreciate that. We're here today to talk about online fundraising platforms and how we can ensure that the work that they do is ethical and how they treat nonprofits and donors. Every year, millions of Americans are donating and volunteering with the charitable nonprofits that are making a difference in their community, and many donors are turning to online fundraising platforms to give. Those platforms can be a really important tool that nonprofits use to generate the resources that they need to serve their missions. But too often, these platforms are operating without the consent of nonprofits and in ways that are counter to the needs of those nonprofit organizations, sometimes even counter to state consumer protection and charitable solicitation laws. And in their process, they're generating millions of dollars in tips and fees. We have heard from nonprofits across the country who have many concerns about some unethical practices by too many online fundraising platforms. Many nonprofits shared with us that they are unaware that these platforms are collecting or soliciting donations on their behalf, and that those efforts might be harming their current or future fundraising efforts or causing confusion with donors. Some have shared that they're using incorrect or outdated information that misrepresents the nonprofit's brand and mission, and that these platforms can create confusion for donors who are unsure of the legitimacy of these websites, and some who are misled into thinking that there's a relationship between the platform and nonprofits when there isn't one. Other platforms are charging hidden fees or setting excessive platform tips as the default, which cut into the donations that actually reach nonprofits. And too often, donors don't know how much of their generous donation is reaching the organizations that they want. Ultimately, it's cutting into the resources for nonprofits, more so than if donors had just reached out to the organization's website on their own. Sometimes donations can take weeks or months to reach the nonprofit. In some cases, they're never reaching the nonprofit. In the case of Flip Cause, which allegedly has illegally withheld more than $1 million in donations intended for nonprofits. Too often, these platforms are inserting themselves as middlemen between charities and donors, which makes it harder for nonprofits to build the long-term relationships that they need to help ensure financial sustainability. Some platforms are even using the paid search engine optimization so that it improves their visibility when people are looking online for information about nonprofits to donate to. And this can result in those donation pages from platforms coming up higher on the search engine than the nonprofit's own website. And then finally, we're hearing from nonprofits about serious issues with implementation, ranging from unauthorized individuals claiming their donations or the inability to remove their pages without first agreeing to a platform's terms and conditions or sharing sensitive banking information. It should be said, platforms can be a really important tool for nonprofits, but it's critical that these platforms are operating in a way that respect both the nonprofit and the donor. Next slide, please. Last year, this issue came to a head when GoFundMe created 1.4 million nonprofit pages without the knowledge or consent of charitable nonprofits. And the response from the field was immediate and clear. Nonprofits were demanding the power to decide for themselves when and how to engage with online fundraising platforms. So NCN and our state associations weighed in directly with GoFundMe to share these concerns, and to their credit, they took those pages down. But we soon realized that this issue was bigger than just one platform. We needed a national framework to ensure that all platforms are operating ethically. Next slide, please. We'll scoot past that one too. So we got to work and we started to form a working group with nonprofit leaders from around the country to find a path forward, hearing directly from nonprofits across the country. And together we created a set of shared principles for ethical online fundraising platforms, both to help protect charitable nonprofits and the generous donations that they've received from donors across the country. These principles are focused on 4 areas: consent, transparency, partnership, and accountability. And I'll talk a little bit about what each one means. Let's go to the next slide. We'll talk about consent, because consent is really at the core of NCN's principles for ethical online fundraising platforms. Nonprofits can't advance their missions without the public's trust, and that trust is built every day by having a presence in the community and by being accountable. But when unethical platforms share inaccurate information or mislead donors or give donors a bad experience, it can compromise that public trust. It is critical that nonprofits have the power and agency to decide for themselves about when and how to engage with online fundraising platforms before they start soliciting donations on their behalf and before they use a nonprofit's logo, branding, images, and messaging. Nonprofits aren't the only ones who are demanding the right to consent in the online space. Restaurants, for example, demanded and achieved an agreement with meal delivery platforms that require their consent before they can be listed. And hotels have reached an agreement with major booking platforms that require explicit agreements with hotels before they can list them. Nonprofits deserve the same protections. Next slide, please. Our second focus of our principles is around transparency for donors. Donors have to have the information that they need in order to decide whether to make a donation through an online fundraising platform. What that means is that donors have to have a way to access information that's clear and easy to see and understand, not buried in small text or in terms and conditions that no one reads. All fees and charges and suggested tips need to be disclosed upfront, even if they're applied by a separate entity, so that the donor knows at the point of donation how much of their donation is actually reaching the nonprofit that they want to help. Platforms need to make it clear that when people are providing tips, whether those tips are going to the platform itself or the nonprofit, and they should never make suggested tips the default. Too often, donors don't know at the point of their donation whether their donation is tax deductible and the name of the organization that will ultimately receive their donation. I know that sounds funny, but many of these platforms use donor advised funds rather than distributing donations directly to charities. And donors need to know that those donor advised funds have the power to choose a different recipient if, for example, they can't contact the first organization that was listed. We believe that donors should have the right to identify a second charity if the first one if they can't get in touch with them, or to get a full refund, including all fees and charges that were applied. Next slide, please. Our third principle is around partnership and making sure that online fundraising platforms are recognizing nonprofits as valued equal partners. When we spoke with nonprofits, it was clear. They want to make sure that funds are transferred to them within 30 days, not weeks or months later. Platforms should not be using paid search engine optimization that would make their websites come up higher in a search than the nonprofit's own webpage. Platforms need to enable long-term relationships and stewardship of donors. The default should be providing information to nonprofits so that they can build those long-term relationships with donors. And implementation must be safe and user-friendly. Platforms have to find a way to address really serious implementation challenges, such as unauthorized individuals claiming their donations and the inability to remove pages without first having to agree with the platform's terms and conditions or sharing sensitive banking information. And our final principle is focused around accountability. Platforms need to be accountable not just to nonprofits, but to donors, the public, and regulators. This means they need to comply with all state laws and hold bad actors accountable. They should publicly report on key information. How many nonprofits are they serving? How much money is ultimately getting to those nonprofits? And how much did they take off in terms of fees and tips? They also need to regularly engage with the nonprofit community so we can improve the partnership that exists between nonprofits and platforms. After our call today, we'll share with you a link so you can read more about the principles, but we want to make sure that you are having your voice heard in this moment. Next slide. We would love to encourage you to share with us your thoughts about our principles and ways for us to further strengthen them. So please take a chance to take a look at them and get back to us. And then if you're comfortable, we'd love to invite you to endorse our principles for ethical online fundraising platforms, to share it with your community members, and to join the fight in urging nonprofits and urging platforms to operate ethically and to proactively adopt these principles into their practices. Next slide. These principles have already been endorsed by 52 state or regional associations of nonprofits across the country, with a combined membership of nearly 40,000 organizations. And it's been endorsed by 8 online fundraising platforms, which demonstrate that you can both help nonprofits raise donations, not at the expense of nonprofits or their donors. So we're really excited today to unveil these principles for online fundraising platforms. We encourage you to join the fight with us, to endorse them, and to stay connected about how you can get involved. And with that, I'll turn it back to Kara.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And now I'm excited to invite our panelists to join us. Our panelists include Jill Bennett, the Chief Executive Officer of Utah Nonprofits Association, Kevin Dean, the President and CEO of Tennessee Nonprofit Network, Allison Fine, the President of Every.org, Jeff Green, Chief Executive Officer of Cal Nonprofits, and Lori Wolf, the President and CEO of the Foraker Group. Welcome and thank you so much for serving as panelists today. So, my first question is for all of you, and that's nonprofits are facing a lot of challenges these days. And given all the challenges that nonprofits are facing, why is this an urgent issue?
I'll go.
Mhm.
Um, Kara, one of the issues is that nonprofits need to be focused on their communities. They need to be focused on their mission. They need to be focused on getting food to people who need food. They need to be focused on all the other amazing things nonprofits do. But instead, with their limited capacity, now they're forced to track down who's raising money on my behalf. How do I find them and what do I do about it? With this incredible increase of these platforms, they're left shrugging their shoulders on what do I do next. So I think it's a detriment to the community that these organizations are out there usurping our time and our effort and our resources.
No, and right now, donor stewardship is so important, especially with individual donors, because there's so much government funding going away. There's corporate funding that's going away, and we're really reliant on those individual donors. So if we don't have their information, if they don't have our information, and we're not being connected directly to them, so that we can thank them, so that we can steward them in the future. Instead of just getting a one-time donation, it's really about making sure that we're building a long-standing relationship with these donors so that they are coming back again and donating annually, monthly, whatever, and not just that one-time donor. There's been several times when in my previous job, I didn't know who to thank. Because I knew I got a check in the mail. I didn't even know how many donors had donated because of that. So that makes it really hard for us to reach out directly to those folks and make sure that they're on our newsletter lists, on our donor lists for years to come.
Yeah, Kara, it's not a surprise at all that this was a flashpoint that happened last year. Uh, Nonprofits, particularly local ones, are chronically under-resourced, and we have for decades been too dependent as a sector on commercial tech, right? We think it's magic fairy dust that they have over there, when what they're doing are extracting fees, extracting data, and don't necessarily have nonprofits' best interests at heart. So, to me, at the heart of this problem is the fact that governments are cutting grants to nonprofits. There are 20% fewer donors giving to a nonprofit today than in the year 2000. And nonprofits are at the mercy of commercial tech platforms.
Thank you so much. My next question is about consent. Why is consent so essential to local nonprofits?
I might just jump in here. I think Sarah did an amazing job at explaining consent and defining it for all of us in a way that we've all mutually agreed to as well. And I'll just maybe add to that or highlight that. I think we're talking about when we speak on with nonprofits and as nonprofits ourselves, we have a greater accountability, the public's trust, the greater good. And so we're not just in it for ourselves or for the data or the money, as maybe these companies are. We're in it to hold the greater good and the greater trust. And so consent is far more than about us. It is about the missions that we serve and the donors that we steward. It is about the greater good of our communities and just the whole system at large.
Yeah, I,
Thank you.
I would agree with that. I think the other piece is that this is about getting the sort of order and power dynamics correct, which is that we are the leadership, the nonprofit sector. We're the ones serving these communities at the request of communities. Most nonprofits on a local level are of by and for, and these platforms are vendors. And we appreciate that. There's lots of different vendors that serve the sector, but those choices are always in every other part of our sector made by the nonprofits who are in fact the ones that are entrusted with that sort of leadership. So I think we need to make sure that they have their rightful place in the ecosystem, but that rightful place is at the request of the nonprofits if we so choose to ask for their service or help.
Uh, I want to tell a brief story about how this affected an organization I used to work for. I used to work for an organization that worked for children or helped children and families affected by HIV and AIDS, and there was a daycare component to that. We had a group of folks who we did not know that hadn't heard from a long time ago. That they were a burlesque performance group that wanted to do something for our organization. And we had a lot of really conservative donors. I'm also in the Bible Belt. And they were speaking on our behalf. They were doing a performance that probably didn't align with the values of our donors. I think it's a perfectly valid art form myself, but our donors, we found out from our donors, and we lost donors because they thought we were aligned with this organization. We had to shut it. We had to shut the whole thing down. We had to get a lawyer involved. And I had some people when we were talking about GoFundMe say, "Oh, but it's GoFundMe." Yes, I love GoFundMe. There are great people there. But there are also other organizations and other groups that can just get our information and start doing things really unethically. And it's not necessarily about going after one particular tech platform. It's about the fact that we don't even know who's out there who's using our name. When I went to one particular platform, I found that our organization, we changed our name almost 4 years ago now. With our former name was still on there. Our board chair from like three board chairs ago was on there. All of the information was wrong. Our mission statement was wrong. And we could not change that without contacting them directly. And then when I tried to get us removed, and this is not GoFundMe, this is another platform. When I tried to get it removed, I couldn't even figure out how to do it. I had to use AI to ask how to remove it because I couldn't find it on their website. So, it's not necessarily about the actors we know. It's about but although they should be asking our consent, it's about the people we don't know that really concerns me, and people speaking on our behalf and our values and our mission and our people that might not even reflect who we are and what we do, especially in this really politicized world right now. I don't want anybody speaking on behalf of Tennessee Nonprofit Network.
Thank you so much. I'm thinking about regulations, and I'm wondering, are current state laws enough to protect nonprofits, or do we need additional state legislation or legislation more generally in order to help us tackle this issue?
I might just jump in since our state
Go
in
ahead, Lori.
Alaska, I'm very proud of Alaska. We're leading the way here, but I will say, and we have strong consumer protection laws and strong solicitation laws. And it's not enough. Donors are all over the country. Our nonprofits are all over the country. They represent the depth and the breadth of the American public. Donors are engaged in lots of ways across state lines. And even though Alaska is doing its part with filing a lawsuit against the first 6 of these platforms, it's not enough. We need to have protections that work across the country, because that's how our donors are also engaging, and that's how our nonprofits are engaging as well.
And I would also like to add to that. I think Lori makes an excellent point. But as we don't know who's raising money on our behalf, our departments of consumer affairs or consumer protection, they don't know either. These websites pop up and they're there, and I don't even know how they would keep track of who is not following the law, frankly.
Yeah, I may be able to shed some historical light on this from California, for better or worse, was the first to jump in here. So 8 years ago, Cal Nonprofits published a series of principles upon which we felt that crowdfunding, and again, 8 years in modern era is a century. So long ago, in a state far away, we had a series of challenges that had to do with I'd say, sort of first wave of the emergence of these sorts of platforms. And those principles were based on really 4 concerns. One was transparency, which we've talked about here, just knowledge of who's getting what, when, and how, and what are the fees. The other was partnership, this notion of just resetting that culture that we need, again, to be seen as, we'll happily partner with platforms to do things, but again, not without us. And then accountability was completely non-existent at that point. So in what we did in California is Cal Nonprofits negotiated with our legislature and worked with the DOJ, and ultimately a law was passed AB 488, which to this day is sort of leading a lot of this because it's one of the few that is out there. I don't know that that's a good system, but I can tell you what happened in this case, and that is that 488 was signed into law. So we put out these principles, sort of started the negotiation in 2018. In 2021, this was passed. It wasn't even fully implemented until March of 2024. So we're still relatively new in this, but there was an oversight hearing that we were part of just earlier this year. There's now a cleanup bill, essentially, that is sort of tweaking what the unintended consequences of that were. But I think the biggest change was requirements on timeliness of payments being moved, requirements on transparency of exactly how much to whom, when, and where. And the other big one was that nonprofits, we've been heavily regulated from the get-go. That's the bargain we make, that we are in the public trust and we therefore need to be hyper transparent. But these platforms were not, and yet they were holding charitable assets. So the big push was to say that as long as you are accepting and holding charitable assets, you shall be regulated like a charity. And because that's the reason we submit to these regulatory frameworks. And so that's what happened. There were unintended consequences from that, which is what we're dealing with now. But I do think it was really important that platforms were then held to the same standard of transparency and accountability with a state regulator. I would certainly prefer that it be done at a federal consistent level, but I do not predict that anytime soon. So I think that states do have to take this on and move. We can't wait.
Kara, thank you for the context, Jeff. That's super helpful. I will say from a platform perspective that I'm hoping that these voluntary guardrails will be a clear public signature of all the issues that you raised, Jeff. I will also say business models matter. How an organization is formed and incorporated is a reflection of values. Every.org is a 501c3. We are a member of this community. And we hope that NCN will even, Kara, provide a button or an emblem that we can use on our website to show that we have voluntarily agreed to abide by both the spirit and the text of these principles. But I would strongly encourage the nonprofit users to dig in to their vendors and their partners, right? Where does the money go? Why are they in business? Who are they serving? What are they doing with the data? What exactly are the fees? And it is incumbent on nonprofits to be asking hard questions of the commercial vendors that they're working with.
Allison, that's a
Kara,
great segue into. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I just was real quickly just say, my response about a national response. I do think we need national laws. Just good ethical practice isn't working. Clearly, it's not working, and so that's not good enough from my perspective. But I also, from working with these amazing colleagues from the other state associations, what we've noticed, right, is that there's just this patchwork of laws across the country. 24 states have really clearer laws, but it's just not enough to protect all donors and all nonprofits across the country. And so I think that patchwork approach is also part of that first question you asked us around the urgency, is that just even trying to untangle this, if you want to get engaged, is pretty difficult if you have donors all across the country and laws all across the country. It's just a patchwork approach, which makes it even more difficult.
Thank you, Lori. Well, to Allison's last point, I think this is a good segue into what I wanted to talk about next, which is for those nonprofits that are listening now that are wondering, what do I do if I discover that I am on one of these platforms without my consent? I'm wondering if you could walk us through what should nonprofits do once they notice that they're on one of these platforms?
Oh, if only it were so easy. If only there were one answer. I mean, the one answer is they should call their state association because we are all working directly with our AG's office, many of us. And if we're not, you should also just call the Consumer Protection Department in your AG's office and let them know. It gets way more complicated from there because every one of these platforms makes it incredibly difficult to get your information off of their sites. And in addition, some of them you can't because if you did try, you would have to agree to their terms and conditions, as Sarah noted before, and that makes it impossible to claim your page is what they call it. And right now, anyone can claim even our pages that we're up there in all of these sites. Many of them we can't take down. And other people could claim them on our behalf, and there's no structure to prevent bad actors in that equation. They make it quite difficult. It's quite complicated. So what we are suggesting is that they document, they screenshot, they take note, and they give all that information to their Consumer Protection Division in their Attorney General's office. And in our case, and many of my colleagues' cases, we would also like to be informed because we can then kind of add that and help advocate on behalf of why this issue really needs to rise to the occasion of our AGs all across the country.
Thank you, Lori. One of the arguments that giving platforms make for the value of their models is that funding would significantly decrease to nonprofits if their platforms went away. What do you think about this argument?
I will say I don't yeah it's specious. I don't buy that is my short answer. They are a tool that has become very important to the sector. But if we know anything about that part of our entrepreneurship world, is that the moment something is put aside or not usable anymore, somebody else is going to come up by next Tuesday afternoon with something that will work better. So saying we need to regulate and have some transparency is, first of all, not equivalent to eliminating a tool, and secondly, it's going to leave room for somebody to do it better, which is what always has happened, and I have no doubt it will and does. I think a lot of the reasoning on that is about the ease with which donations can be made, and I think we can have a debate about, at what point does the threshold, the resistance and how easy is it to make a donation actually stop a donation from getting made. I think that's a legitimate conversation, and we certainly have it in nonprofit spaces. But I don't find that argument compelling.
The argument that platforms should go away or that platforms aren't going to go away?
Without platforms, it all falls apart. I mean, we see that every
I didn't
time.
hear it that way. No,
Yeah.
so the way I heard it, Jeff, was, well, my opinion. So platforms are part of the ecosystem, as is embedded giving and Roundup and all the different ways that technology is making access to giving easier. Um, and AI is going to explode the number of ways to give because it's just so easy to set up online. So whether folks are satisfied with platforms or not, they're here in the same way that DAFs are here. The question is, how can we encourage ethical behavior and discourage unethical behavior and educate nonprofits and serve donors and nonprofits well, as you said, get the friction out of the giving equation. On every.org, the average age of donors is under 45, right? So younger people love giving this way, and they want to give through Venmo and crypto and all sorts of ways, Jeff, that are newer to folks who are a bit older than that. And that's just the nature of where technology is headed. But I think this conversation is so important, Kara, to be proactive about ensuring that giving is happening in ways that are helpful to nonprofits, not extractive.
And I just want to say, if you've watched public policy in the last 50 years, anytime regulations are imposed on any sort of corporate entity, they always say they're going to go away and that's BS. That is absolute BS, and it's preying on our fears right now of what's happening to our nonprofits. And so the fact that they are saying we will go away if we have to do anything extra, uh, makes me really angry, to be quite honest. And I think we should all be very angry about that. There is absolutely a place for these platforms. They're not, Allison's right, they're not going away. And they are important to the ecosystem because we have a lot of peer-to-peer fundraising, and younger folks really that's an important part of sort of how they give. At the same time, just because there are it might be an imposition to some of these companies, and some of them are even are nonprofits. That's not our problem. That's their problem for doing it the wrong way to begin with, and we should not sweat at all about it.
Amen, Mr. Dean.
Obviously, I'm pretty
Kudos,
passionate about this.
kudos. Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's a scare tactic. I couldn't agree with you more, Kevin.
Bill, I saw you came up mute. Did you
I
want
was
to
just going
respond
to
to
say,
something?
preach it, Kevin.
I do think there is an opportunity just to say too, right? We're making a distinction here between knowledge and consent and everything else, right? And so there are lots of ways these tools are being used where lots of, as Kevin pointed out, where, people to people kind of work is happening where there is lots of knowledge and lots of consent. And that doesn't seem to bother them at all. And it doesn't bother the end user or the donor. It doesn't bother anybody. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the wholesale gathering of nonprofit data from 990 data or from a source like a Candid or something like that, and dumping it into the system without knowledge or consent. That's what we're talking about. And so the fear tactic and even the comparison that this is an apples and oranges conversation. The GoFundMe's of the world, they're going to keep doing what they do, and they could they just need knowledge and consent. It's not just our opinion, it's the law in many of our states. So
Correct.
let's also be clear about that. This is not like, oh, let's just be good business practice. Let's just do the right thing. This is about breaking the law in many of our states, and potentially, if we, are successful, perhaps the whole country.
Thank you, Lori. Both Republicans and Democrat state officials have raised concerns about platforms acting unethically. Why do you think this issue cuts across partisan lines? And are there particular arguments that you think are most persuasive to state officials?
I think every community across the country, regardless of political persuasion, it relies on their nonprofit sector. In some places, it's much more obvious than others, but nonprofits and nonprofits alone, I want to be very clear, that's not philanthropy, that's not any other service part, any other vendor. Nonprofits enjoy the highest trust communities across the country and have for generations. So I think that's because they're built in community by community, responding to needs of community, and so, regardless of political persuasion, most elected leaders at some level recognize that truth and they act accordingly. So anything that they see that's going to threaten that or make something harder for those organizations that they rely on, there is broad support for creating a framework where this kind of what we're calling ethical behavior is in fact also the law. And so it's not just a suggestion; it's a requirement to do business. And I think that's what we all want to see.
Experience with people all across the aisle in very red parts of our state and maybe more purple parts. People care. They care deeply about the nonprofit that is impacted in their community, and they care deeply as donors and as volunteers and as community leaders, not just as elected officials. And the nonprofits represent the depth and the breadth of our communities, and there are no party lines here when it comes to just being following the laws in our states and having good ethical practice.
Thank you, Lori. We have about 10 minutes left for this panel, so I'm going to turn to our audience questions. And the first question is there a list of these platforms that nonprofits can go to so we can see if we're listed and decide if we want to consent?
Well, the list will change by next Monday if you look today. So
Oh,
that's
we
part of the
wish.
challenge.
We wish there was. Yeah, and not even Google will find it all. Like we're still finding ourselves in new platforms all the time. Other people are still finding us around all the time. It's people have figured out These companies have for-profit and nonprofit alike have figured out they can make money and they can mine data, and they are changing by the second. If only we knew.
Thank you, Lori. The next question asks, I like the principles, but are they binding? Are rules or laws changing as a result of this initiative?
I mean, this is what we're talking about when we start with the principles and use that to try to build some consensus. So, laws and regulation will be built upon that. And that's certainly what happened in California. It was 3 years between the publication of these principles and trying to get this conversation going before there was any legislative action. And I would anticipate, I can't speak for everyone, but that it'll be the same here, is that we're trying to just build a broader coalition of folks with some points of agreement, and then legislative work would follow.
Thank you,
I
Jeff.
don't think it's okay to stop at just the principles, I guess is the other important thing to say. I mean, voluntary compliance is a lovely thing, but as Kevin pointed out, every time regulation is introduced and everyone screams, "Oh my God, the sky is falling," and of course it never does. The same thing is true with this kind of regulation. It's, "Oh, we'll police ourselves," and the answer is no, you won't. So let's just move on past that and get to some clear guidelines.
Thank you. And Jeff, this next question is for you to follow up on what you shared about the process that you went through in California around giving platforms 8 years ago now or so. You mentioned unintended consequences. Could you say more about those?
Yes, and thank you for asking that. I will say that there were several. The biggest one was that our Department of Justice, so part of the statute that we introduced was actually a prohibition, and this was a negotiation with the DOJ. They said they would do this in such a way so that they would not allow platforms to pass funds on to organizations that were out of compliance with state law already. Now, in California, being out of compliance with state law can happen for very minor, signature in the wrong place on a form kind of issues. And often nonprofits historically weren't aware of that. There wasn't a great communication back and forth. So folks may have been out of compliance technically for many years and there was no other consequence. They were filing annually, they were doing what they thought they needed to do, but there wasn't that communication loop. Well, with the introduction of this law, what happened is that it allowed the DOJ to have more leverage over those organizations. And so in the statute, you had that the platform could not pass funds on to an entity that was out of compliance with state law. What started to happen was that those previously minor administrative issues that led to someone being, and I like to do finger quotes, out of compliance, were suddenly had a severe consequence, which was that your fundraising was cut off. And worse yet for the platforms, and I actually have quite a bit of empathy for this one, is that they ended up being the messengers. So suddenly a nonprofit X is waiting for those dollars to come, and they're told not by the DOJ, but by the platform, "I'm sorry, we're not allowed to give you the money that was fundraised for you given to us by your donors because the state won't allow it." So that was the biggest one. It actually, in the end, forced the hand of this negotiation we've been in the midst of. And I'm happy to say that after many, many hundreds of hours of negotiation with the DOJ and a new law, which is AB 2221, carried by the same author, some of this will be untangled. There's a new system going online this month. There's a lot of things that have happened, but it was very painful for quite a while. And there were some pretty high profile examples, including, World Central Kitchen at the height of some major disasters. If you're cut off and you're raising tens of millions of dollars, a week without being able to access those funds can have pretty traumatic consequences. So that was probably the biggest example of an unintended consequence.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Sure.
So this is our last audience question. After experiencing a situation similar to Kevin's nonprofit, a motorcycle group decided to fundraise on my nonprofit's behalf. They used our logo, etc., and then never gave us the money. We put an explicit note on our website indicating we would list authorized fundraising opportunities on our website. Not a perfect solution, but we had to do something, and this was a dozen years ago. Does NCN or any of you have similar updated language that nonprofits can put on websites to keep our donors informed?
Well, it's
Take
actually
that question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kevin. Sorry.
It's actually, they just updated the language, I think last year in Tennessee, in a bill that passed to address this. fundraising on other people's behalf, you have to have it in writing that they have consented. This is how our state Secretary of State and AG were already aware of what was happening with GoFundMe and some of the other platforms. So if you would like to talk about that language, hit us up in Tennessee, and we can provide you with that. Well, you can probably find it online too, but we can definitely talk to you about that if you want to, work on some legislation in your state. And I know that everybody else, I think everybody else on this panel, the state associations have laws in place that we can certainly share with you. I don't know that having something on your, having something on your website is going to be enough. People are still going to do it, so now let's crack down on them. Make sure that they are, I with Facebook, I'm calling out Facebook. I did every year I would do a fundraiser back when I was on social media for myself. I have yet to see that money. That my mother gave $100. So there's $100 floating around somewhere with Facebook that they owe us some money to. So I hope somebody on Facebook is listening because y'all owe us some money.
For Kara, while we wait for the law, in Alaska, while we wait for the lawsuits to take effect, and we wanted to activate our nonprofits to give them some locus of control around the issues, we have published different statements that nonprofits all across the country and in Alaska can use. They can put them on their website. They can put them in their donor communications. It can be the PS on a donor note, or they can put them on their social media pages of just saying, like, these are the approved places that we are raising funds for our mission. And so to take a little bit of locus of control back, we have created that language, and anyone can use it. And I believe that NCN will be sharing that link to our website after the call. But we do encourage, again, as Kevin said, we want laws in place, but while we wait for those things to take effect, I do think there is a moment of nonprofits just feeling very overwhelmed by this issue. That is our experience. And so we wanted to give some locus of control back, which is the essence of this language. And we give lots of different versions, and people should definitely lean into their own values and their own voice as they're crafting these words. But if ours are a basis to help get that conversation started in your boardroom, in your staff room, then by all means, we hope that people will use it.
Thank you, Kevin and Lori. Wonderful. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for such a rich and honest conversation. I really appreciate all of your takes on this. And now I'm excited to turn it over to Allison Fine to give a set of remarks.
Thank you so much, Kara. And thanks to the National Council for creating this opportunity and inviting us in as partners. Just a little bit about me. I have spent my entire career in the nonprofit sector, always at this intersection of tech and social good. I've written 4 books on the topic. The last one was on AI for good, and have been at every.org for over 3 years now. And I've always considered the National Council as home base and the state associations as the greatest gateways to all of the amazing nonprofits in this country. As Jill said early on, all of the organizations that are in healthcare and education and helping to feed people and doing all the basic services that communities need across the country. When the founders of every.org created the organization, they intentionally chose us to be a 501c3. It is a reflection of our values that our job is to reduce the friction for giving and to get out of the way, and hopefully to build a stronger relationship between donors and nonprofits. In addition, being a 501c3 allows us to accept non-cash assets like crypto and stock and DApps, and we don't directly charge for any of those things. It was a very easy decision for us to sign on to these principles. This is how we operate every day. There is nothing in here that requires us to change our business or feel uncomfortable in any way. The entirety of the principles are all about creating more trust. And we desperately need trust in order to increase fundraising. And one of the things that I'm proudest about with every.org is that about 70% of the organizations that use us for fundraising have budgets, annual budgets under $5 million a year. So the members of the state associations are our key clients and partners, and we hope that that will only continue to grow. I do want, Kara, just to say for 1 second that, as I mentioned before, AI is going to make these kinds of some of the nefarious efforts proliferate, but it's also an opportunity. The plummeting cost of coding, of creating technology, is an opportunity for more nonprofits whose core capability is tech, like ours, to be created to support the ecosystem of nonprofits. Of course, not all nonprofits have good intentions. I understand that. However, the default setting in the nonprofit sector for a very long time has been to turn over our data, our systems, our infrastructure, including fundraising, to commercial entities who may not share our values and have a very different purpose in mind here. So I'm looking forward to working with the National Council to strengthen tech nonprofits that can serve all of our communities much better. So again, Kara and Sarah and Diane and the National Council and the state associations here, I really want to thank you for inviting us to participate. We are so proud of being the first platform to sign on to the principles. We hope others will as well. And we look forward to continuing to serve all of the nonprofits doing amazing work across the country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Allison. And thank you all for attending this webinar on the principles of ethical online funding platforms. If you'd like to learn more about NCN, we invite you to visit our website, councilofnonprofits.org. We have a lot of great resources for you, which you will receive in a follow-up email in the next couple of days. Thank you again, and have a good rest of your day.